We're live with Lala. Is that your name?
Yes.
Okay. Lindsay and Lala. So we are going to talk today about adoption and all the craziness that goes on. I would love for you just to give a background of who you are. I've seen a couple of your videos, but to be honest, I don't know much about you. My followers probably don't either. Maybe they do. I'm not sure. So give a little background and then we can dive in.
Awesome. My name is Lala. I am a domestic infant adoptee. So that means I was born somewhere in the United States and then adopted in the United States. And I've been on TikTok talking about adoption, learning about adoption, advocating for reform for the past couple of years.
And you were adopted at birth, you
Mhm.
said?
It was
And
30 days after I was born.
what state were you born in?
I don't like to share specifics, just internet craziness, but I was
Yeah.
adopted in a closed state. We have closed adoption law. I've recently reunified with some of my family now that I'm in my 30s. But yes, I grew up knowing next to nothing.
So I would love for you to talk about what what brought you to my page, what triggered you, what you would like to kind of open the platform with, and then we can go from there.
I think it's impossible to be an adoptee on TikTok and not have found your page by now. I think
Yes.
if you haven't found
Yes.
you by now, you're under an adoptee rock. But yeah, I've seen a lot of discourse. You've gotten a lot of responses. I've responded as well. But I think, you know, while there's room for nuance here, one thing I see a lot when I talk to adoptive parents and hopeful adoptive parents is largely a true unawareness of the adoption system in the United States, the legal ramifications, and just the legal landscape of adoption in America and what those consequences can be. I think that the deck is stacked against adoptive parents in that regard. We've got a $30 billion adoption industry with a for-profit sector that's been operating for decades that is more profitable if adoptive parents don't know all of this. If we don't do some studies on this, I think that leaves both adoptive parents and birth parents kind of in the dark when making these decisions. So, I think a lot of us adoptees kind of grow up, realize what's going on. And when some adoptees see that message hasn't gone out yet, I think it can be frustrating. But I understand because I think infertility trauma is something that the adoption industry has capitalized off of. And I'm very sorry that it seems as though that has been your experience as well as many others.
I agree. So it was really interesting. I want to talk about two things. So the first one, when I went to the agency and we had the conversation about them being a for profit. I dove into that with them and I was like, can you explain that? That doesn't make any sense to me. They're like, well, the reason why we're for profit is, and then they listed off whatever the reasons may be. One of them was so that they can pay their social workers more because they're overworked. I wouldn't say that, but they're overworked and they're allowed to pay them more. They also explained the side of things where if an adoption doesn't go through, they still have supported that birth mom throughout the entire process, giving them all the different resources that they need. Whether the parent chooses to parent or not, they are there for all of that. So to me, when they said that, I was like, okay, that makes sense. But in reality, it seems very, very strange that there aren't nonprofits handling adoption. So I totally understand where you're coming from. It does seem very backwards that a agency would be for profit. That is kind of a red flag.
It makes sense that you hear that and you go, paying social workers more sounds good. Helping birth parents more sounds good. I have a master's degree in nonprofit administration, so I know how this
Yeah.
is supposed to go. And that's not how it's supposed to go.
Yeah.
So the reality of what has happened is that this was built for profit. The structure of
Yeah.
adoption in America was built for profit. Now the majority is nonprofit, but that for-profit sector is still largely influencing the nonprofit. This
Yeah.
whole thing, you might know this history, but this whole thing was started by a woman named Georgia Tann. And she was a famous serial child trafficker and serial unaliver. She came up with the idea of changing the birth certificate so that when she was taking a child from a low income woman, selling him to a high income woman, that mother and child couldn't find each other, and that this adoptive mother could pass off this child as biologically hers, hiding the fact that the adoption took place. And we just still operate under that system, and there are still adoptees today that are finding out later in life that they are adopted. And what that does, when we change the birth certificate, that makes it so that if you're an adoptee in the United States, you know that you're an adoptee. If you know how old you are because you know your birthday, if you know your culture, history, your background because you know where you were born, if you have any medical information on yourself that's correct, that's a privilege. That's not a right. So that's still the system we have with the for-profits. What that means is any surplus income they make off adoption doesn't have to go back into their mission, like
Sure.
being social workers. That can go into the pockets of CEOs and stakeholders. So what this has created is this financial ladder where adoptive parents are footing the bill, and it goes up to the adoption agencies, and then they will pay into other organizations. Sometimes it's not even an agency, it's just a law firm that's handling it. And those same lawyers are writing laws that are keeping the system in place. Mm-hmm. The reason that has kept going is because they are selling hopeful adoptive parents who have likely been through years of infertility and are already traumatized from that, all these really good sounding things. And the reality is that if you have a for-profit system, that can't be child-centered because it's profit-driven. And it's turned adoption into a for-profit market economy where adoptees are the product and adoptive parents are the consumer. And we can't have a child-centered system out of that, no matter our good intentions.
So are you opposed to adoption, or are you opposed to the for-profit side?
Well, both. Adoption in the US only legally means changing the birth certificate. The idea of that a child needs to be raised by someone who's not their biological family, that's external care. And we're always going to need a system of external care in the United States. We're always going to need some type of system where we're changing for parental rights from one person to another. While I think that legal definition of adoption needs to change, the other part of it is the for-profit sector. So I think we need to do both. I think we need to do away with the for-profit sector and change the definition so that we're not stripping rights from kids in already desperate situations.